Hey, Nikki here with my latest Know Me pattern, which is ME2129. So this pattern is a dress over a bodysuit. And yes, the bodysuit is included, which I think the bodysuit is probably my favorite. Um, but this particular tutorial is going to be for the dress. And for this dress, you'll need some type of flowy fabric. You're going to need a chiffon or a mesh or organza. What else does it call for? Just something like silky, a lot of movement, something like that. I've made it with both fabric with stretch and without stretch. Of course, a fabric with stretch, you need to size down a bit. Um, but nonetheless, I love them both. Also, I've made this pattern because it's a really simple pattern. And I know I say that all the time, but it is truly a simple pattern. And I've made it with a zipper, and then I've made it the way it's designed with buttons. I will tell you that the button application down the back, I think it's like 7 buttons. It elevates it a bit more. So this tutorial is going to be from beginning to end, just like it is out of the package. So what you'll need, in addition to, of course, the fabric, you'll need 7 shank buttons. I don't have any shank buttons, so I'm going to make it with just regular buttons, which, I mean, it looks nice. I've made it with regular buttons before. Shank buttons, of course, are so much easier. But I will go through the process with this one. You'll need a bit of elastic, and it's only going to be the elastic that's going to go on the sides, so you don't need much. And I believe that is it. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. We'll cut the pieces out, and it's just a few pieces. It's the front, the back, sleeve. I also made one that's sleeveless. It's so nice for summer too. Um, I believe it's probably like one, two, three, like maybe 4 pieces. It's a quick sew. It's a quick sew. Um, once you get the hang of it. But I will take you through the process of doing the back buttons, and I will show you step by step, so there's no confusion. Also, this is made with French seams. So I'm going to do French seams throughout. Of course, that's optional. It's your choice if you want to take the time to do French seams. If you're using like an organza, a chiffon, something that's a really sheer fabric, I do recommend doing French seams. It just looks so much cleaner. But it's going to take you a little longer to do the French seams. I think that is it. Yes, so let's go ahead, cut the pieces out, and get started. Happy sewing. Okay, so we have the pieces cut out. We have the elastic. We have the buttons. Of course, I have the flat buttons and not the shank buttons, but that's okay too. So what I've done, because it's really difficult to use a marking pen when using or tracing paper to use when you're using chiffon. So I'm just using like this little tape. It works very well as opposed to kind of marking up the fabric and it being erased. Um, so I have all of these pieces cut out, and now we are ready to go. We're going to start with the front and the back. Okay, so like I mentioned before, we're doing French seams. So this process is going to be the same throughout the dressmaking process. So traditionally, when you're doing a seam, you're going to put right sides together. But when you're doing a French seam, you're going to put wrong sides together. So this is wrong sides together. We're going to match up. At this point, we're just doing the shoulders. And depending on how slippery your fabric is, you may need to do clips or you can do like thicker pins. It just depends. So we're going to stitch again 1/4 of an inch. So what you're going to do after you stitch both seams, again, it's really important. It has to be on the wrong sides together. Once you do that, you're going to trim close to the stitch, making sure you don't stitch through. And then you're going to close that seam up. So you're going to now stitch right sides together. So you're going to stitch that seam right sides together. So just fold it over and make sure you pin because you want that seam like right on the top. So you want it like nice. Even if you need to go and just do a quick iron, you want to do that just to make sure it's a nice crisp seam. Once you do that, go ahead and stitch through the seam line and casing. And that's how you do the flat French seam. It looks really clean. And of course, you want to do that for both sides. And we're going to do that with all the seams. So it's going to add some time onto it, but I think it's really well worth it. But again, if you don't feel like doing this, you don't have to. You can just skip this whole process and do just a regular seam. Or you can finish it with an overstitch. Okay, now what you're going to do is around the neck, you're going to do a narrow hem. So you're going to press under, and this is the entire neck area. You're going to press under 1/4 of an inch around the entire, so it's going to be the neck, back, and front. So it's this entire neck side. You're going to press under 1/4 of an inch, and then you're going to stitch close to that pressed edge. So I'm measuring just to make sure it's 1/4 of an inch as I go around. And working with a slippery fabric, you definitely want to make sure your measurements are accurate. And then we're going to stitch all the way around. Okay, so once you have it folded under, and now you're going to stitch close to that pressed edge. So as close to the edge as you can get it. Okay, so once you do that, you're going to go ahead and you're going to trim it if you need to. And sometimes I feel like I don't need to trim it, but I would just kind of trim some of the kind of like the rough edges off. And then you're going to fold it under another eighth of an inch. Again, depending on your fabric, I would also try to press it just because it keeps it nice and straight. So just kind of do the process again, but instead of the fourth of an inch, you're going to use an eighth of an inch to press that under. And this sewing gauge really helps making sure you keep it accurate all the way through. And then stitch. Now you're going to simply stitch this in place and just give it one good press after you stitch it. So now what you want to do is you want to grab piece number 6, which is the loop. And this is the loop that's going to act pretty much as your for your buttons. It's like your button loop. You're going to fold this in half lengthwise. And after you do that, just give it a quick little press. Okay, so once you have it pinned, you want to go ahead and you want to stitch that using about a fourth of an inch seam allowance. After you do that, you want to take some type of device. I would recommend you getting a loop that helps turn it right side out if you don't have one. But go ahead and turn that right side out and then give it a press. Now what you want to do is you want to cut 7 pieces from the loop that are 2 1/4 inch long. And then just set it to the side. Okay, so now what you want to do is grab piece number 7, which is the back facing. There's 2 pieces. You want to fold under 1/4 of an inch, and you want to do that on the unnotched side. So there's one side of each piece that's notched. Fold under 1/4 of an inch on the unnotched side. And then we're going to stitch close to the pressed edge. We're going to do that for both sides. Okay, so once you have that stitched, now what you want to do is you want to fold under 5/8 of an inch on the lower edge. And you want to do that on both sides and then stitch. You want to stitch close to that edge. Okay, so if you notice the little pieces of tape that I have on the back here, this is where your markings are. But I mentioned before that it's a lot easier working with this type of fabric, that if you just kind of like put little pieces of tape where the markings go, it's a lot easier. It doesn't damage your fabric, yada, 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 yada. So now what we're going to do, we're going to take those loops and we're going to take each loop and you're going to kind of fold it and bring the ends together. And you're going to use the back little pieces of tape as the guide. So you're going to fold each piece of the loop, and there's 7 pieces, and you're going to kind of twist it and place it on the marking, and then just go ahead and pin it. And you're going to place the loop with the loop part going toward the left and the raw edge of the loop matching up with the raw edge of the back. Because after you do that, then you're going to stitch across the bottoms of each loop. Okay, what you're going to do now is stitch over each individual loop. So we're not going to just stitch down the whole edge. So you're going to do each loop individually. Okay, so now what you want to do is take that facing that you finished, which is piece number 7, and you want to put right sides together and you want to pin the facing to the back. And you want to make sure you match the small dots, the large dots, and the dots and the notches. And you're going to stitch from the neck down to that large dot. So pin all the way down, and you want to do that on both sides. Again, you're matching up the raw edges, the unfinished edges. And you want to do that on both sides. Now you're going to stitch down the edge of both sides, making sure you reinforce the stitch at the beginning and at the end. So now what you want to do is you want to stitch the center back below that dot. So it's below that large dot starting here. And you're going to use it and stitch in a French seam. So again, it is wrong sides together, stitch, then trim, and then do the right sides together. And just keep in mind that with the French seams, you're going to do that throughout. So if I mentioned French seams, that's how you're going to sew it. Again, it is completely optional. So after you stitch that, then you want to go back and fold this over again, which are right sides together, and then you're going to stitch. Okay, so we have the back seam done. Now what you want to do is you want to take the facing and you want to fold it over and pin it to the inside. And you want to make sure when you fold that over that you are folding it over so that the seam is really flat and straight. Once you do that, you're probably want to go to just give it like a really quick press, and you want to do that for both sides. Once you do that, you then want to take and stitch down the side on both parts. So you want to be able to grab that back and the front. Okay, so now what we're going to do is the side ruching. So we're going to pin the front to the back at the side edges. Remember, with the wrong sides together, because we're going to make the French seam. But what we're going to do is we're going to basically hide the side ruching elastic within the side seam. So once you put the two sides together, wrong sides together, we'll go ahead and stitch. We're going to stitch at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so now we're going to install the elastic. So on the side, you want to make sure you have your markings. Of course, I put my tape here that lets you know where the elastic markings should be. So you're going to pin one half of the elastic, one end of the elastic to the top, and then pin the other part of the elastic to the bottom. So when you stitch this, you have to make sure you stretch the elastic as you're stitching. And we're going to do this for both sides, reinforcing the top and the bottom half of the elastic. So after you've installed the elastic on both sides, you want to then flip the garment and then stitch the side seams again. You want to put them together, making sure the seam line is completely parallel, and then stitch. You want to do that down both sides. And again, that's creating that French seam. In addition to creating the French seam, it's also encasing the elastic. So you shouldn't be able to see the elastic in here. And here is a closer look of the side seam. Okay, so now what you're going to do is grab piece number 8, which is the sleeve. And on the sleeve, you see the markings. You want to make sure between those markings, you put 2 rows of ease stitching. So that's the longer stitch. You can even do this by hand or by machine. So we'll do that for both. Now you want to stitch the sleeves using a French seam. Once you stitch the closure for the French seam, then press the seam toward the back. And after you stitch, if necessary, trim the seam allowance, making sure you don't trim into the actual stitch. And now with right sides together, you want to pin, making sure that seam is right at the top and really crisp. And then you want to stitch this again. Okay, so now to make the French seams with the sleeve, you're going to turn the sleeve wrong side out and you're going to hold the garment right side out with your armhole toward you. So with wrong sides together, you're going to pin the sleeve to the armhole edge, making sure the center, if you can just put like a little pin in the top center so that you know where the center is, and then you're going to match up the bottom underarm seams. Then you're going to fit the sleeve as you go around, pulling the eave stitch thread just so that you can fit it in. And you want to do that on both arms. So once you have this completely set in, then you want to go ahead and stitch. And you want to stitch using a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So now what you want to do is you want to trim close to the stitching, making sure you don't trim through the actual stitch. And once you do that, you're then going to turn the fabric to the right sides together and stitch through the seam line, encasing the actual seam. So you want to pin it, making sure that seam is right on the edge. And then you're going to stitch all the way around. You're going to do that on both sleeves. After you've stitched, then you want to go ahead and give it a really good press. Okay, so we have the French seams on the sleeves, look really nice. Now what you want to do is you want to finish the hem and the hem of the sleeve. And you want to do that using a narrow hem the same way we did the neck. And that's pressing it under and pinning it 1/4 of an inch, then stitching it and making sure you stitch close to the pressed edge. And then you're going to press under again 1/8 of an inch and then stitch that in place. Okay, so we have the hem completed and the sleeve completed. Now what we want to do, which is the final step, is go ahead and put the buttons. Now, again, the pattern calls for the shank buttons, which are so easy. You could just hand stitch the shank buttons on. But because I don't have any, I'm going to use just the regular buttons. And so when you're using the regular buttons, you have to make sure you don't stitch the buttons on too tight because you want the loop to be able to fit over the buttons. So just go ahead and place the button. So you want to kind of close it, like faux close it, so that you can make sure the buttons are going to be positioned in the correct place. And then simply add the buttons on, and then you will be complete. So we have the buttons attached and everything is hemmed and we are complete. I know there was a lot of steps to this. A majority had to do with the French seams, but I think it was a pretty easy sew. But if you have any questions, any comments, let me know. Happy sewing.